Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Kat and I write children's fiction. Happy New Year! This is my first video of 2019 and no, it's 2020. It's 2020. This was kind of the point. Anyway, Happy New Year! It's my first video of 2020 and I am back after a mini hiatus. To be honest, I'm not super rested yet, but the show must go on, so I'm very excited to film this video nevertheless. I looked back on my most watched video of 2019, which was the year that I started this channel, and you guys seem to like my video on writing a book in a language that's not your native language by far the most. So I decided to make some more videos where I talk about bilingualism. And today I'm going to talk about writing bilingual characters. I'll be speaking about my own experiences as a bilingual, so I mean, you can obviously hear my accent. So I grew up speaking German and now I transitioned to mostly speaking English, as well as the experiences of my multilingual friends. And I also have a background in German and English philology with a focus on linguistics. That's what I studied in university, so I'm gonna be bringing an academic perspective to this as well. This topic is very, very complex, so I noticed while I was writing the scripts that I actually have way too much content for this to only be one video, so I actually decided to split it up into 4 different videos. Today's video, of course, is the introduction. We just did that, and I'm also gonna talk a bit more about what it actually means to be bilingual, and I'm gonna give you a few guiding questions that you can ask about your character when you're writing them, when you're creating your character profile, just to kind of get to know them a little bit better and get to know the relationship that they have with their languages. Alrighty. So the first question that we actually need to answer is, what is bilingualism or what is multilingualism? So the answer to this might seem pretty straightforward because bilingualism is defined as speaking more than one language fluently. But when you actually think about it, you will quickly notice that the answer is anything but straightforward, because there is no defined point at which you can say that you speak a language fluently. I don't have a clear-cut answer for you in this situation. All I'm saying is that you should think about what speaking bilingually will mean for your character, and I will help you with that in the rest of this video. One of the guiding questions would be, when did they learn the language? So did they learn it from birth? Did they grow up speaking mainly one language and then only learned the second language in their adulthood, but regardless they reached some fluency? This is gonna change a lot of things. So for example, I learned English in school, but I only moved to an English-speaking country when I was 19. So basically I was already an adult, which is why I still have an accent. You should also ask yourself whether they learned the language in a more formal setting, such as a school setting, or whether they learned it in a familiar setting. This might influence things like them being literate in the language and being able to read, for example, a different alphabet. Another question you should ask yourself is how immersive the language learning experience was for your character. It's a very different thing if you live in a country, grow up speaking the language, if all the media you consume is in that language, if you listen to music in that language and read books in that language, or if you just go to your grandma once a week and hear her speaking a language and communicate with her in that language. Another question you can ask yourself is how similar the two or the multiple languages your character speaks are, and also if they have the same alphabet. For example, think about a child of Russian immigrants who grows up speaking Russian to their parents, but they live in an English-speaking country. They will most likely be able to speak Russian, but since Russian has a different alphabet, they might not be able to read and write it at all. I touched on this in many of the previous points, but you should also just ask yourself if the character ever grew up in a country where their languages were spoken, and if so, how long did they live there? Because I, for example, am very familiar with all aspects of grown up German life because I lived in Germany for 26 years of my life, whereas someone who moved away from Germany at age 10 will most likely be not familiar with terms surrounding taxes or maybe some terms related to school that weren't relevant when they moved away yet. So just, basically think about where this character grew up and what kind of stages of their life they lived in a specific language. You should also ask yourself how good your character is in general with learning languages. I mean, there are some people who are more talented at learning languages than others, and this might really shape their attitude towards that minority language that they're speaking, or even towards the new language that they're speaking, that is the majority language. And this also leads me to my last guiding question that you should ask yourself, which is how your character feels about each of the languages that they're speaking. Are they proud of it? Are they, for example, trying to hide it and just to fit in? Basically, just think about how their surroundings would react to them speaking the language, and also what they would feel inside when they speak the language. So depending on these guiding questions, you could have the following categories of bilinguals, and I just made up those terms, so don't use them. But I think in the context of this video and in the context of trying to get my point across, they work pretty well. The first category would be the full bilingual or full multilingual, who is able to speak their languages pretty much at the same level. They would be able to speak, read and write in those languages pretty much equally, and most likely they won't have much trouble switching back and forth between the languages. The next category would be the half bilingual, which means that they have one dominant language and one language that they know less fluently. They might also know the different languages at different competencies. So I gave the example earlier on of immigrant children who might be able to speak one language pretty fluently, but who might not be able to read and write the language at all. This can also work the other way around, by the way. So think about someone who maybe learned the language very much in a formal school setting and who is able to read and write it, but not really able to speak it. This can especially be true of dead languages such as Latin or ancient Greek, or some maybe magical dead language in the fantasy book that you're writing. And finally, the next category that I would say exists for bilingual speakers is the quarter bilingual, which means that they might be able to completely understand a second language, but they might not be able to produce anything in that language. So when you have language knowledge, there's a distinction between actively knowing a language and also passively knowing a language. Because when you passively know a language, you might be able to more or less or even fully understand that language just based on context, but you might not feel comfortable producing that language because that, of course, takes a much more in-depth knowledge where you can't work with context because you are the one giving the context. Again, this might be true of immigrant children who maybe grew up listening to their parents speak that language, listening to their grandparents speak that language, but nobody ever forced them or successfully forced them to produce the language themselves, and that's why they don't feel comfortable expressing themselves. Alright, so this was my video for today. If you're interested in this topic, of course, subscribe to my channel because, as I mentioned before, I have 3 more videos planned for this topic. Next week I speak about the don'ts of writing bilingual characters. The week after I speak about what you should do when you write bilingual characters. And then finally I will also talk about code switching. And if you have no idea what that means, it's one of the most important topics when it comes to writing bilingual characters because that's where most authors go wrong. So definitely stay tuned. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you next time. Bye!